becoming popular during that period of time. And so a lot of the Negro entertainers did a lot of entertainment. The white people would flock to the nightclubs, but of course the Negro people were not allowed to go to restaurants or anything else. They had to stay in their own area. Another interesting thing that came up, you've heard of George Washington Carver and his inventions. George Washington Carver was a black man who went to school during a period of time that black people were not allowed to go to school. And he actually went to college and studied botany, and he came up with the idea of crop rotation. At that time, the people in the South were growing cotton. That was their big thing. And he taught them if they would plant peanuts or other crops on other years, then the soil wouldn't waste out like it had been before. And he actually saved the farmers millions of dollars. And he was given a special award in Washington, D.C. for his work with these people and how he had done so much for the farmers. And then when he left the building, he went to a restaurant to get lunch, and they told him he couldn't eat there. So that was part of the racial segregation at that period of time. Something else that you would find interesting was the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the United States. And of course, there were many, many whites who became very fearful when the Negroes were allowed to go where they wanted to do and to do what they wanted. And that was the original formation of the Ku Klux Klan, was basically to keep the Jewish people and the Negro people down. They formed their groups, and if you have ever seen or been to a Ku Klux Klan rally, anybody ever been to one? They had one in Seymour about 15 years ago. And I was working in the mayor's office at that time, and they sent us a letter and told us that they would be having a rally in Seymour. And of course, there's nothing you can do to prevent someone from having a rally if they ask for permit to have a meeting or a gathering. You really can't tell them no. And so we ended up working with the state police on that. And they have one state policeman, and that's all he does, is work with different areas when the Ku Klux Klan comes in. So he met with us, and he said, now what you don't want to do is you don't want to have any kind of disturbance. You don't want somebody yelling at them, throwing things at them, causing any kind of a riot, because once that happens in a community, the next year they'll come back, because that's what they want. They want the publicity of having somebody attack them. So we were actually forced to, we put up snow fence. They decided they wanted to go to the Superior Court building, which is out Freeman Field. I don't think they realized that that wasn't the center of a big area, but that's where they said they wanted to go. So we fenced all that in with snow fence, and we had mounted policemen protecting them. We brought them in on a special bus, which we paid for, and we took them out on a special bus. And we had no incidents, and they have never been back. But it cost us about $4,000 for the time we called in all the extra manpower and had all the extra protection for these people who hate anybody who is not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. They're very much opposed to Catholics, Jews, Negroes, and anyone who is not a white Protestant person living in the United States. So that's just kind of an interesting sidelight, but that was very, very popular in the 1920s. In fact, the state of Indiana had the largest membership of Ku Klux Klan as any state in the Union. And a gentleman named D.C. Stevenson was the Grand Dragon for the state of Indiana. And his main job was to add more members. And they would have these big rallies. They had a big rally at Shields Park. Hundreds of people joined. They had pitch-in dinners. They had pitch-in dinner at Weddellville. And all these people went. And they started out very subtly so that people really didn't seem to realize the whole idea. You know, they would tell them that they were for the America They were for the American people. They wanted to make sure the American people were preserved, and they would give them all this, and then sometime later they would find out this hatred toward Catholics, Jews, and they very much had a area of hatred. And the reason I think that Indiana had such a large membership was because of this V.C. Stevenson. It even influenced the governorship. If you were not a member of the Ku Klux Klan, the governor was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Everybody in high politics were members because their influence was so great they could get people elected that they wanted to get elected.
Was he from Bedford?
No, he was originally from, I think, Arkansas or someplace in the South, and he just came up here. But he was either married to or lived with a lady named Martha Dickerson who lived on Calvin Boulevard.
I was getting ready to say, I knew there was something about Calvin Boulevard.
Yeah.
I know the house, but
Yeah.
I couldn't piece it together.
He was, I've never found a record where they were actually married, but I think they lived as man and wife.
But didn't there was somebody from Bedford that was really big in the Klan in this area.
Probably so. His name came up more often because he was such a big shot in the state, and it was just, you know, part of it that he lived with this lady that lived here. And he was, I mean, he was one of the most powerful people in the state of Indiana. And for every person, it cost $10 to become a member. Back then, $10 was a lot of money. And he got $4 for every member he got into the Klan, so he was a very active person when it came to adding members. But he messed up. He was working in Indianapolis, and he had a secretary, a young lady. She was a teacher, and he actually kidnapped her and put her on a train and raped her. And she was a young lady, I think, pretty naive to the ways of the world. She was so upset by this, by what he did to her. He wouldn't let her loose. She was on this train for I don't know how long. And so she became so upset by that, she took poison to try to get away from him. And so after she took the poison, he took her back to her home in Indianapolis with her parents, and she subsequently died. And he was arrested for that. They said she was covered with bite marks all over her body, and she was bleeding profusely, and she took this poison and she died, and he spent the rest of his life in jail. And that pretty much started breaking up the whole Klan thing, because he thought the other Klan members would come to his rescue and bail him out of jail, and they didn't do it, and some of them were very influential people. So he started telling tales on these other people, and so many of the high-up officials who were Klan members were forced to resign because of the information he gave to the police. So it turned out to be a pretty nasty deal, and that started becoming the end of the Klan having such a powerful influence in Indiana. But, you know, there were lynchings, there were a lot of bad things that happened through the Klan, yes.
But the Klan really was pretty active up into the 40s, wasn't it?
Oh, they're still active. I mean, they've never stopped being active, but as far as
well, I mean, in this area around here,
yeah.
that's...
I don't remember the Klan in the 40s, but maybe I would. I was only born in 1939. I'm not quite that old, but I don't remember any Klan activity when I was young. But possibly it was, and I just didn't know it. But that was one of the things that happened in the state of Indiana that is really kind of a black mark to us, that we had the largest membership of Klan members in the whole United States. That's kind of sad. Some of the other things that were really popular during that period of time, and one of the big things which I failed to mention was the election of the president in 1922 was the first time women were allowed to vote. And so that was a really big election. In late 1914, Woodrow Wilson was elected president, but in 1922, Warren Harding was elected president. It was the first election that women could vote, and the way we got the news here in Jackson County was they had a wireless, they sent a telegram to the county courthouse to let them know who the president was, and then the news went out from there. But that was a big thing because women had been fighting for the right to vote for many years, and they finally succeeded in getting that. So that was the first election that women were allowed to vote. You know, you think about some of the other things that happened. Do you know who Alvin York was? Do you remember Alvin York? He was a World War I hero. He had killed 50 Germans at one time, single-handed. He was a sharpshooter. He was from the hills of Kentucky or Tennessee, and he was very well known in the United States for his heroism. And he actually came to Brownstown and gave a speech at the American Legion there at Brownstown following World War I. That was a big, exciting thing to happen in the area here. Something else that happened during the 20s was Lucky Lindy, Charles Lindbergh, flying across the Atlantic from New York to Paris, and he did that in little over 33 hours. They said when he lived, and of course he was the pilot of a very small single-engine plane, and he had enough fuel in his plane that they thought he wasn't going to be able to get off the ground. But he did, and he made it all the way in a little over 33 hours, and that was a big deal. And at one time, he flew over Jackson County. And so everybody knew that he was going to come and he was going to fly over Jackson County, and a lot of people said they saw the plane, but there really wasn't any confirmed sighting of it. But I assume maybe if they thought they saw him, maybe they did, because planes were a pretty big deal back then. But that was quite an exciting thing for that to happen. Another exciting thing, of course, was baseball. We had the New York Yankees with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. That was a very exciting time. And of course, Babe Ruth in the 20s hit his 60th home run, which was the first time that had ever been done in a season. And, you know, that was a really big deal for everybody. And, you know, if they couldn't get on the radio, they read it in the newspaper, and, you know, they followed baseball very closely. It was a very, very popular sport. The Indianapolis 500 started up in the 20s, and the first man to win had an average speed of 91 miles an hour, which you could probably do out here on 65 at any given time, just trying to keep up with traffic. He was awarded $35,000 for his accomplishment, and at that time that was a pretty big deal. Emily Post became a bestseller, and nobody really knows why, except for the fact that she was pretty down to earth in what she told people they should do, and so it became very popular that you set your table like Emily Post said for you to, and you acted like Emily Post said for you to. One of the biggest problems during the 20s in all the local areas was fire. You know, without electricity in some areas, fire was more common, and unfortunately, if a fire occurred in a home, that it usually burned to the ground. They couldn't do much about it. It was a real fear of people to have fire, and there were several fires in downtown areas in all the cities in Jackson County, in all the towns, because there wasn't much in the way of fire prevention, and there wasn't much in the way of how to stop a fire once it started. So that was something that was very, very common during the 20s. Another incident they talked about was this man that had robbed a bank, and he got away, and he went through the country out somewhere in western Jackson County,